What happens when a country uses torture to stop terror? And what happens when that same country uses terrorists to fight its enemies? Both these accusations have been made against America. Indeed, the CIA has been cited for its use of torture and for its involvement in terrorism in Bosnia, Chechnya, and other former Soviet states. A US Air Force's officer has even described his own camp as a pressure cooker for extremism. Is it incompetence in the CIA which creates extremist groups such as ISIL, or do they simply not care? A Jordanian official has confirmed the CIA helped train members of ISIL in 2012 at a secret base in Jordan. If the CIA believes this is a positive act in the public interest, why then has this information been kept secret? A former senior CIA officer has also revealed the US's hope that Shias and Sunnis would kill each other in Iraq and Syria, suggesting an agenda of division and destruction in the Middle East. We have also learned that a former top al-Qaeda commander admitted all current al-Qaeda affiliates, including ISIL, work for the CIA. It raises questions about the CIA's goals regarding ISIL. Is the CIA concerned about creating extremist groups? What is the CIA's role in the Middle East? And what exactly does the CIA want from ISIL? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. And we began with this. One of the gravest revelations about the CIA is its use of torture, and also its involvement in terrorist activity in Bosnia, Chechnya, and other former Soviet states. How does that make you feel? That's the question we asked the American public.
Not good? Kind of terrified?
Well, I mean, as long as it's not done against the other Americans, I really don't, whatever works. I mean, if that's working for them, but on the other hand, from what I hear, the information is not very credible under that kind of environment.
Unsettled and worried, anticipating horror.
I don't think that that's the answer. I mean, if it's used on us, sometimes we have to use it, but I don't think that's the answer. I think that we can seek out intelligence in other ways, but you know what? Sometimes it takes a little pressure, but I think there's other ways to seek out intelligence.
I don't agree with those type of practices. Not comfortable with that. I don't think anybody should be subjected to any of those type of those scenarios. So
Torture is not a very good thing, so I don't know. I guess when they're protecting the United States, they think it's okay. So I guess it's situational. It depends on the situation and why it's being used.
As a country that stands for freedom and equality and treating people humanely, I am more than shocked and appalled at the fact that we practice torture on people without any care or regard, and our government lies to our face about it.
What can our experts tell us about the CIA's involvement in torture and also its links to terrorism in former Soviet Union countries and elsewhere?
The fact is that the CIA, and indeed not just the CIA, intelligence services around the world, for example, the UK's MI6, there have been many reports of their involvement in the facilitation of what might be called violent jihad, in terms of the propagation of extremism. And many would say that there's a relationship in some ways between that and, for example, the use of torture, because of course when one is using torture on suspects, if those suspects then survive, they're going to hold considerable hatred even for the people who tortured them, but not only the torturers themselves, but also whom they represent. So, for example, in the case of the CIA, people who have been tortured by the CIA and their relatives and their friends will, of course, hate the United States and the West generally. And so there is a relationship to some degree in those respects. But when one looks at the use of torture, we've got two issues really, at least, because at least you've got the situation where you've got the torturers themselves who are personally to blame, of course, for their actions, and nobody can excuse those actions. But also when one looks at the situation with the CIA with the torture report and so on, one can see that the chain of command went all the way very close to the top of the United States political and military command structure, which meant that torture was sanctioned and excused and hidden, even, for example, by not using the word torture at very high levels. And that, of course, places the entire political military system as culpable in the, if you like, the use of this torture.
Well, I'm sure as I and many other people across the world, it makes me feel appalled because this is not just any state we are discussing. The United States of America considers itself as the beacon of world democracy and of liberal values and human rights. So for such a country to act in such a horrific way and impose this kind of brutal barbarism on innocent people really does reflect in such a negative way on America and calls into question the fact that America is a champion of human rights. And this is a criticism that many have had of the United States of America, that it is hypocritical, that it is very contradictory. It acts in one way and it gives a political rhetoric which goes in a different direction. So these acts of torture are not surprising and would manifest this lack of humanity which is present within the United States foreign policy.
A former US Air Force security officer and compound commander at Camp Bucca in Iraq said the camp created a pressure cooker for extremism. Is the CIA indifferent to creating extremist groups such as ISIL, or simply inept at preventing that?
I think they're incompetent by avoiding it, because even though they know all this stuff is going on, they're just typically just ignoring it and acting like everything that they're doing is more important than what other people are doing.
I think the CIA thinks it's better than everybody, and therefore it does ignore that the situations they get involved in cause more problems and hatred of America.
Since America's always okay with helping, the enemies of our enemies, we don't judge much on like the fact that they might turn against us. Kind of like what's their faces, the Taliban with Osama bin Laden back in the day before he got killed allegedly. So I guess America likes to go around giving people guns, not regarding who they are, and we cry about it when those guns get turned on us. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have enough information to make a statement about that. I would hope that they're not incompetent.
What are the motives behind the CIA's provocative actions? Do they really not care about provoking extremism, or are they simply too incompetent to stop it? We asked our experts.
When you take thousands of people and subject them to a brutal, barbaric and unlawful regime of torture and detention that goes well beyond any process of law or remedy, it is going to, of course, have some radicalising impact on many of those, and not only that, many, many thousands more who are their relatives and friends. But also it has a wider undermining role, should we say, in delegitimising the countries concerned in that operation. For example, if the United States and the United Kingdom talk, as they do a lot, about shared values of democracy, freedom, transparency, rule of law, accountability, when they then for 10 years or so participate in and promote a exercise such as the rendition program, it of course gives the impression, rightly or wrongly, that in fact those values are not genuinely held values at all, and in fact these are just a smokescreen for actually a brutal program of promoting national, and in many cases not even national but sectional interests within those communities. So in other words, the use of torture in this way, the use of unlawful detention, rendition and so on, which was widespread, undermines, delegitimises the claims of many Western countries to be concerned about the rule of law, democracy, freedom and so on. And of course it's upon those supposed values and shared values that their foreign policies are said to be based.
Well, the fundamental factor behind the emergence and consolidation of the Islamic State within Syria and Iraq has been the history of the occupation of Iraq by the United States and the brutal, illegal way in which the United States ruled that country. These camps and these prisons, which you had thousands of Iraqis hoarded into were hubs of radicalization. They were the source of ISIS. Baghdadi, who is the Khalif of ISIS, if we'd like to say, he was in an American jail cell. He was ruled by the United States of America. It is the United States which has a fundamental role behind the creation of ISIS, whether advertently or inadvertently. Without the US occupation of Iraq, there would be no Islamic State today.
A Jordanian official confirmed that the CIA had helped to train ISIL operatives in 2012 at a secret base in Jordan. Why did the CIA keep this a secret? We asked the public.
Because we're repeating the mistake with Osama bin Laden. We did the whole thing, you know, we trained them, and look what happened to 9/11. So that's a tough responsibility to carry.
They don't want the public to know?
I have no idea about that. The American public would be in outrage if they heard about that, probably.
They probably kept it a secret because Americans think that those are our enemies, so why would the CIA be training our enemies? I don't know.
They've been doing the same thing throughout history. I mean, Saddam Hussein, they put him in power, and then they took him down because he wasn't doing what they wanted. So, do I know that they did this? No, I don't. But if they did, it's typical of them.
Because it's embarrassing, because they don't want people to know about it. I think because they kind of have like a long history of doing that.
What was the reason behind the secrecy regarding the CIA's training activities in relation to ISIL? We asked our experts to give their opinion.
There needs to be a distinction made in this issue of Jordanians training Al-Qaeda and ISIS-linked operatives, because some will point out that they were training what they would call, and did call at the time, moderate rebels to be put into Syria, who then, they would argue, and they do argue, defected to ISIS, Al-Qaeda and related groups. And so therefore they would say they were not training Al-Qaeda and ISIS people. But the fact is that a very large proportion of those that they did train did go to ISIS and to Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra affiliated groups. And really this Jordanian experience begs lots of questions of the entire so-called moderate rebel program that the United States, the UK, France and others in the West, but particularly those around the GCC countries, we know Qatar, Saudi Arabia and so on, have been very active in funding and promoting Syria's rebellion. And of course they have invariably marketed this as a moderate rebellion, and the West would like to imply that this is to do with democracy, to do with being secular, liberal even. And of course that has proved not to be the case. And so therefore, once these people have then gone into Syria, they have revealed their true colours. But of course any person with knowledge of the region, person who had knowledge of those people and the vetting processes that were put in place, which were not very efficient at all and not very much in depth at all, would have known that many of those that were on this training program, they were not involved in democracy or to do with secular politics. They were interested only in deposing Assad. And of course, deposing Assad was the West's, including Jordan's, foreign policy at that time.
Well, this has been a statement which has been very well documented. The United States has had a hand in arming different forms and levels of jihadist groups within Syria, ranging from moderate groups to the highly extreme groups. And all of the groups the US has armed have essentially ended up and culminated as moderate, as hardline jihadists, as Al-Qaeda affiliated jihadists. This has been part of US policy in Syria, as they know that the only way they can win the battle in Syria is by using these indoctrinated, brainwashed jihadi combatants. The Jordanians have been coordinating with the US to create this jihadist army, and the US would conceal such a fact because it would question its whole presence and its whole policy within the Middle East yet again. Obama has come under intense criticism, but the exposure of such a facet of US foreign policy, especially in light with what is occurring now, would seriously pose significant questions to Washington over its Syria policy.
A former senior CIA officer recently admitted America's hope is that Shias and Sunnis would kill each other in Iraq and Syria. What, in the American public's view, does this say about the CIA's role in the Middle East?
I'm not sure. It's not good.
They just want them to undo themselves, and then they don't have to have a hand in it. Simple as that.
I feel like this is something that they are heading towards, and that they actually plan for something like that to happen, so to make their situation a lot easier to take care of and clean up afterwards.
They're violent. They know what they're supposed to do, but they're not supposed to create chaos. They're not supposed to create wars. They're not supposed to make people fight. They're supposed to make peace around here, keep quality and all that, not make everyone go against each other.
If that's true, then they really have no business being over there or doing any of that.
I guess maybe they're hoping to not have to get involved. If they end it themselves, then it'll be easier job for the CIA.
This kind of stirring things up, that it kind of like wants it to happen. It's kind of be like something like in Northern Ireland, the Catholics against the Protestants, and if you keep both sides stirred up, hoping that you're going to be the winner, or you can take advantage of all the chaos that's going on.
The admission by a senior CIA officer concerning morbid hopes of violence between Shias and Sunnis is worrying. We asked our experts to read the situation.
What isn't clear, of course, is whether that was his own personal opinion, which he was expressing, or whether that was representing in any way the views of the CIA or even less the US government. Because as we know, the US has taken sides, the West does take sides in this, what it likes to call a Sunni-Shia divide. It invariably will support, for example, what it calls democracy in Syria, in Iran, but it won't support democracy if it's in Bahrain or in Saudi Arabia, for example. And so we know that the West, quite likely for very sound financial reasons, are supportive of the Sunni monarchies that, of course, are really dictatorships, but will undermine the situation, will undermine similar or even more liberal Shia regimes. The situation that we have in Yemen is a good example, where the West, whilst it is on the one hand allied with or quite happy to be allied with Iran, for example, in Iraq, because it needs Iran in Iraq against ISIS there. Nonetheless, as soon as Saudi Arabian interests are supposedly threatened in Yemen, of course the West will side with Yemen, with Saudi Arabia against the Houthi militia there, simply because they are Shia, and therefore the presumption is that they are backed by Iran. So the geopolitics of it are complex.
Well, the United States has always had a policy and a strategy of divide and conquer within the Arab world, whether it is the partition of different Arab countries going back to the age of original Arab nationalism, or today where we see the funding and arming of different groups to fight other different groups of a different sect or ethnic minority or ethnicity. Sectarianism and the inner conflicts in countries from Yemen to Syria to Iraq are the prime way in which the United States can divide and harm the Middle East so that it is weaker, and the US can then come and pounce on what is left over and implement its interests according to its rules after we have an Arab world which is fractured, divided and fragmented.
A top former Al-Qaeda commander admitted that Al-Qaeda affiliates, including ISIL, work for the CIA. What exactly does the CIA want from ISIL? We invited the public to speculate.
I would like to know, and I don't know, but I would like to know. So good luck to us, because we're entering a time when maybe the end of civilization is near. I don't want to be apocalyptic, but look at the history books, we are there, so maybe we need to reset. And destruction means renaissance. Not that I'm wishing it, but I think that that's where we're bound.
They would like to know what's going on with ISIL, as they are an enemy of the United States.
Intel, control, have control of the whole entire situation as means then at any means as necessary. So if it requires hiring those type of people, so yeah, they will take that advantage.
I don't know about that one. I don't know about that one.
Can I not answer that one? I don't want to answer that one.
I don't believe they're connected to the CIA. Therefore, I don't think it's a valid question, so I have no answer.
I would probably say to get rid of Hamas. more than likely. I mean, that's why ISIL was created to begin with. And again, creating stability in a whole region that we ourselves are very invested in is very good for the United States. And, you know, toppling governments, keeping governments unstable and unable to make full-on decisions and being able to, like, play out their plans.
What does CIA want from ISIL? I guess kind of, yeah, to keep more of the chaos going. It kind of only works in our favor, lower oil prices or something for it. That we're just going to profit from the confusion.
What exactly are the CIA's plans for ISIL? As always, we gave the last word to our experts.
That one can see that if you go back many decades, for example, to Bosnia, to Chechnya, even before that back to Afghanistan in the days of the Soviet occupation and the West's, particularly Britain and the United States, arming and training of the Mujahideen that then morphed eventually towards the Taliban and towards Al-Qaeda even, that the West has seen extremist jihadists as, if you like, a useful foreign policy tool. They can be inserted into a state, they can be trained, they can be armed, they can wreak havoc within a certain state if that state has been targeted for destabilization. We saw that in the case of Afghanistan. We saw the West doing it in Bosnia, Chechnya. We saw it in Libya, and we, of course, are seeing it in a very large scale in Syria in the present day. If anything, the situation where the West, or Britain and the United States, we should say more specifically, invaded Iraq, this proved to be a very costly exercise in terms of money and in terms of lost lives. And so therefore now what we've seen subsequent to that is a return to this old strategy of, if we like, using jihadists to destabilize the country. It's much cheaper for the West. It doesn't involve the actual invasion of massed armies, air forces and so on, being used in the way that we saw in the invasion of Iraq in 2003. It doesn't involve the loss of life for the West that an invasion like Iraq involved, and indeed Afghanistan. So it's much cheaper in terms of blood and money to actually just use these jihadists in terms of pursuing the West's foreign policy of destabilizing countries such as Syria and Libya.
Well, the CIA has had a hand in creating jihadist groups within the Arab world. Hillary Clinton once stated that the US armed and created Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. ISIS would be the perfect example for any US intervention within the Middle East. It would provide an excuse to further demonize the Arab populations, and it would play into this ideology of Takfiri militantism which is present in Iraq and Syria. Furthermore, the concept of Orientalism, how the West perceives the Arab world, this is a factor which Hollywood and the United States of America have worked on incredibly over the previous decades. And the presence of ISIS and the way the West perceives ISIS as your average Arab terrorist would definitely play into this hand and would aid a perception that the average American views the Middle East as a hub of terrorists. This is partly due to US foreign policy in the region and partly due to the Western media, which makes an Arab into a terrorist because of the way it covers and sees events in the Middle East and Arab world.
The CIA is the intelligence, conspiracy and execution wing of America's brutal foreign policy. Their actions in the Middle East are dividing and devastating that region, and in that sense their latest asset is ISIL. Yet whatever their original intentions, it seems that Washington and the CIA in particular have created a monster which they cannot control and no one can destroy.